Welcome back to Bedtime Stories ASMR. As you know, these old stories were some of the first to be recorded in the world, and Greek and Roman mythology inspired much of later history, including the Renaissance period, where it had a huge resurgence. I want you to see, as we're reading this old Greek myth, if you can find any similarities between this story and a more modern fairy tale that you might have heard. An interesting exercise, one I think you'll enjoy. If you like Greek mythology and you like this series, please remember to leave a like on this video and comment any similarities that you found between this story and a modern fairy tale you may have heard already. Thank you. Stories of love and adventure. Cupid and Psyche. This story is told only by Pelleas, a Latin writer of the 2nd century AD. The Latin names of the gods are therefore used. It is a prettily told tale after the manner of Ovid. The writer is entertained by what he writes. He believes none of it. There was once a king who had 3 daughters, all lovely maidens, but the youngest, Psyche, excelled her sisters so greatly that beside them she seemed a very goddess consorting with mere mortals. The fame of her surpassing beauty spread over the earth, and everywhere men journeyed to gaze upon her with wonder and adoration and to do her homage, as though she were in truth one of the immortals. They would even say that Venus herself could not equal this mortal. As they thronged in ever-growing numbers to worship her loveliness, no one any more gave a thought to Venus herself. Her temples were neglected, her altars foul with cold ashes, her favorite towns deserted and falling in ruins. All the honors once hers were now given to a mere girl destined someday to die. It may well be believed that the goddess would not put up with this treatment. As always, when she was in trouble, she turned for help to her son, that beautiful winged youth whom some call Cupid and others love, against whose arrows there is no defense, neither in heaven nor on the earth. She told him her wrongs, and as always he was ready to do her bidding. "Use your power," she said, "and make the hussy fall madly in love with the vilest and most despicable creature there is in the whole world." And so no doubt he would have done if Venus had not first shown him Psyche, never thinking in her jealous rage what such beauty might do even to the god of love himself. As he looked upon her, it was as if he had shot one of his arrows into his own heart. He said nothing to his mother. Indeed, he had no power to utter a word, and Venus left him with the happy confidence that he would swiftly bring about Psyche's ruin. What happened, however, was not what she had counted on. Psyche did not fall in love with a horrible wretch. She did not fall in love at all. Still more strange, no one fell in love with her. Men were content to look and wonder and worship, and then pass on to marry someone else. Both her sisters, inexpressibly inferior to her, were splendidly married, each to a king. Psyche, the all-beautiful, sat sad and solitary, only admired, never loved. It seemed that no man wanted her. This was, of course, most disturbing to her parents. Her father finally traveled to an oracle of Apollo to ask his advice on how to get her a good husband. The god answered him, but his words were terrible. Cupid had told him the whole story and had begged for his help. Accordingly, Apollo said that Psyche, dressed in deepest mourning, must be set on the summit of a rocky hill and left alone, and that there her destined husband, a fearful winged serpent, stronger than the gods themselves, would come to her and make her his wife. The misery of all when Psyche's father brought back this lamentable news can be imagined. They trussed the maiden as though for her death, and carried her to the hill with greater sorrowing than if it had been to her tomb. But Psyche herself kept her courage. "You should have wept for me before," she told them, "because of the beauty that has drawn down upon me the jealousy of heaven. Go now, knowing that I am glad the end has come." They went in despairing grief, leaving the lovely helpless creature to meet her doom alone, and they shut themselves in their palace to mourn all their days for her. On the high hilltop in the darkness Psyche sat, waiting for she knew not what terror. There, as she wept and trembled, a soft breath of air came through the stillness to her, the gentle breathing of Zephyr, sweetest and mildest of winds. She felt it lift her up. She was floating away from the rocky hill and down until she lay upon a grassy meadow, soft as a bed and fragrant with flowers. It was so peaceful there, all her trouble left her, and she slept. She woke beside a bright river, and on its bank was a mansion stately and beautiful. As though built for a god, with pillars of gold and walls of silver and floors inlaid with precious stones. No sound was to be heard. The place seemed deserted, and Psyche grew near, awestruck at the sight of such splendor. As she hesitated on the threshold, voices sounded in her ear. She could see no one, but the words they spoke came clearly to her. The house was for her, they told her. She must enter without fear and bathe and refresh herself. Then a banquet table would be spread for her. "We are your servants," the voices said, "ready to do whatever you desire." The bath was the most delightful, the food the most delicious she had ever enjoyed. While she dined, sweet music breathed around her. A great choir seemed to sing to a harp, but she could only hear, not see them, throughout the day. Except for the strange companionship of the voices, she was alone, but in some inexplicable way she felt sure that with the coming of the night her husband would be with her. And so it happened. When she felt him beside her and heard his voice softly murmuring in her ear, all her fears left her. She knew without seeing him that there was no monster or shape of terror, but the lover and husband she had longed and waited for. This half-and-half companionship could not fully content her. Still she was happy, and the time passed swiftly. One night, however, her dear though unseen husband spoke gravely to her and warned her that danger in the shape of her two sisters was approaching. "They are coming to the hill where you disappeared to weep for you," he said. "But you must not let them see you, or you will bring great sorrow upon me and ruin to yourself." She promised him she would not, but all the next day she passed in weeping, thinking of her sisters and unable to comfort them. She was still in tears when her husband came, and even his caresses could not check them. At last he yielded sorrowfully to her great desire. "Do what you will," he said, "but you are seeking your own destruction." Then he warned her solemnly not to be persuaded by anyone to try to see him, on pain of being separated from him forever. Psyche cried out that she would never do so. She would die 100 times over rather than live without him. "But give me this joy," she said, "to see my sisters." Sadly, he promised her that it should be so. The next morning the two came, brought down from the mountain by Zephyr. Happy and excited, Psyche was waiting for them. It was long before the three could speak to each other. Their joy was too great to be expressed except by tears and embraces. When at last they entered the palace, and the elder sisters saw its surpassing treasures, when they sat at the rich banquet and heard the marvelous music, bitter envy took possession of them, and a devouring curiosity as to who was the lord of all this magnificence, and their sister's husband. But Psyche kept faith. She told them only that he was a young man, away now on a hunting expedition. Then, filling their hands with gold and jewels, she had Zephyr bear them back to the hill. They went willingly enough, but their hearts were on fire with jealousy. All their own wealth and good fortune seemed to them as nothing compared with Psyche's, and their envious anger so worked in them that they came finally to plotting how to ruin her. That very night Psyche's husband warned her once more. She would not listen when he begged her not to let them come again. She never could see him, she reminded him. Was she also to be forbidden to see all others, even her sisters so dear to her? He yielded as before, and very soon the two wicked women arrived, with their plot carefully worked out. Already, because of Psyche's stumbling and contradictory answers when they asked her what her husband looked like, they had become convinced that she had never set eyes on him, and did not really know what he was. They did not tell her this, but they reproached her for hiding her terrible state from them, her own sisters. They had learned, they said, and knew for a fact, that her husband was not a man, but the fearful serpent Apollo's oracle had declared he would be. He was kind now, no doubt, but he would certainly turn upon her some night and devour her. Psyche, aghast, felt terror flooding her heart instead of love. She had wondered so often why he would never let her see him. There must be some dreadful reason. What did she really know about him? If he was not horrible to look at, then he was cruel to forbid her to ever behold him. In extreme misery, faltering and stammering, she gave her sisters to understand that she could not deny what they said, because she had been with him only in the dark. There must be something very wrong, she sobbed, for him to so shun the light of day, and she begged them to advise her. They had their advice all prepared beforehand. That night she must hide a sharp knife and a lamp near her bed. When her husband was fast asleep, she must leave the bed, light and lamp, and get the knife. She must steel herself to plunge it swiftly into the body of the frightful being the light would certainly show her. "We will be near," they said, "and carry you away with us when he is dead." Then they left her torn by doubt and distracted what to do. She loved him. He was her dear husband. No, he was a horrible serpent and she loathed him. She would kill him. She would not. She must have certainty. She did not want certainty. So all day long her thoughts fought with each other. When evening came, however, she had given the struggle up. One thing she was determined to do. She would see him. When at last he lay sleeping quietly, she summoned all her courage and lit the lamp. She tiptoed to the bed, and holding the light above her head, she gazed at what lay there. Oh, the relief and rapture that filled her heart! No monster was revealed, but the sweetest and fairest of all creatures, at whose sight the very lamp seemed to shine brighter. In her first shame at her folly and lack of faith, Psyche fell on her knees, and would have plunged the knife into her own breast if it had not fallen from her trembling hands. But those same unsteady hands that saved her betrayed her too, for as she hung over him, ravished at the sight of him and unable to deny herself the bliss of filling her eyes with his beauty, some hot oil fell from the lamp upon his shoulder. He started awake. He saw the light and knew her faithlessness, and without a word he fled from her. She rushed out after him into the night. She could not see him, but she heard his voice speaking to her. He told her who he was, and sadly bade her farewell. "Love cannot live where there is no trust," he said, and flew away. The god of love, she thought. He was my husband, and I, wretch that I am, could not keep faith with him. Is he gone from me forever? At any rate, she told herself with rising courage, I can spend the rest of my life searching for him. If he has no more love left for me, at least I can show him how much I love him. And she started on her journey. She had no idea where to go, and knew only that she would never give up looking for him. He, meanwhile, had gone to his mother's chamber to have his wound cared for. But when Venus heard his story and learned that it was Psyche whom he had chosen, she left him angrily alone in his pain, and went forth to find the girl of whom he had made her still more jealous. Venus was determined to show Psyche what it meant to draw down the displeasure of a goddess. Poor Psyche in her despairing wanderings was trying to win the gods over to her side. She offered ardent prayers to them perpetually, but not one of them would do anything to make Venus their enemy. At last last she perceived that there was no hope for her, either in heaven or on earth. And she took a desperate resolve. She would go straight to Venus. She would offer herself humbly to her as her servant, and try to soften her anger. And who knows, she thought, if he himself is not there in his mother's house. So she set forth to find the goddess who was looking everywhere for her. Psyche gazed at the sleeping Cupid. When she came into Venus's presence, the goddess laughed aloud and asked her scornfully if she was seeking a husband, since the one she had would have nothing to do with her because he had almost died of the burning wound she had given him. But really, she said, you are so plain and ill-favored a girl that you will never be able to get you a lover except by the most diligent and painful service. I will therefore show my goodwill to you by training you in such ways. With that she took a great quantity of the smallest of the seeds, wheat and poppy and millet and so on, and mixed them all together in a heap. By nightfall these must be all sorted, she said. See to it for your own sake. And with that she departed. Psyche, left alone, sat still and stared at the heap. Her mind was all in a maze because of the cruelty of the command, and indeed it was of no use to start a task so manifestly impossible. But at this direful moment, she who had awakened no compassion in mortals or immortals was pitied by the tiniest creatures of the field, the little ants, the swift runners. They cried to each other, "Come, have mercy on this poor maid and help her diligently." At once they came, waves of them, one after another, and they labored, separating and dividing, until what had been a confused mass lay all ordered, every seed with its kind. This was what Venus found when she came back, and very angry she was to see it. "Your work is by no means over," she said. Then she gave Psyche a crust of bread and bade her sleep on the ground while she herself went off to her soft, fragrant couch. Surely if she could keep the girl at hard labor and half starve her too, that hateful beauty of hers would soon be lost. Until then she must see that her son was securely guarded in his chamber where he was still suffering from his wound. Venus was pleased at the way matters were shaping. The next morning she devised another task for Psyche, this time a dangerous one. "Go down there near the river bank," she said. "Where the bushes grow thick are sheep with fleeces of gold. Go fetch me some of their shining wool." When the worn girl reached the gently flowing stream, a great longing seized her to throw herself into it and end all her pain and despair. But as she was bending over the water, she heard a little voice from near her feet, and looking down saw that it came from a green reed. She must not drown herself, it said. Things were not as bad as that. The sheep were indeed very fierce, but if Psyche would wait until they came out of the bushes toward evening to rest beside the river, she could go into the thicket and find plenty of the golden wool hanging on the sharp briars. So spoke the kind and gentle reed, and Psyche, following the directions, was able to carry back to her cruel mistress a quantity of the shining fleece. Venus received it with an evil smile. "Someone helped you," she said sharply. "Never did you do this by yourself. However, I will give you an opportunity to prove that you really have the stout heart and singular prudence you make such a show of. Do you see that black water which falls from the hill yonder? It is the source of the terrible river which is called Hateful, the river Styx. You are to fill this flask from it." That was the worst task yet, as Psyche saw when she approached the waterfall. Only a winged creature could reach it, so steep and slimy were the rocks on all sides, and so fearful the onrush of the descending waters. But by this time it must be evident to all the readers of this story, as perhaps deep in her heart it had become evident to Psyche herself, that although each of her trials seemed impossibly hard, an excellent way out would always be provided for her. This time her savior was an eagle who poised on his great wings beside her, seized the flask from her with his beak, and brought it back to her full of the black water. But Venus kept on. One cannot but accuse her of some stupidity. The only effect of all had happened was to make her try again. She gave Psyche a box which she was to carry to the underworld and ask Proserpine to fill with some of her beauty. She was to tell her that Venus really needed it. She was so worn out from nursing her sick son. Obediently as always, Psyche went forth to look for the road to Hades. She found her guide in a tower she passed. It gave her careful directions how to get to Proserpine's palace, first through a great hole in the earth, then down to the river of death, where she must give the ferryman, Charon, a penny to take her across. From there the road led straight to the palace. Cerberus, the three-headed dog, guarded the doors, but if she gave him a cake, he would be friendly and let her pass. All happened, of course, as the tower had foretold. Proserpine was willing to do Venus a service, and Psyche, greatly encouraged, bore back the box, returning far more quickly than she had gone down. Her next trial she brought upon herself through her curiosity, and still more, her vanity. She felt that she must see what that beauty charm in the box was, and perhaps use a little of it herself. She knew quite as well as Venus did that her looks were not improved by what she had gone through, and always in her mind was the thought that she might suddenly meet Cupid, if only she could make herself more lovely for him. She was unable to resist the temptation. She opened the box. To her sharp disappointment, she saw nothing there. It seemed empty. Immediately, however, a deadly languor took possession of her, and she fell into a heavy sleep. At this juncture, the god of love himself stepped forward. Cupid was healed of his wound by now, and longing for Psyche. It was a difficult matter to keep love imprisoned. Venus had locked the door, but there were the windows. All Cupid had to do was fly out and start looking for his wife. She was lying almost beside the palace, and he found her at once. In a moment he had wiped the sleep from her eyes and put it back in the box. Then waking her with just a prick from one of his arrows, and scolding her a little for her curiosity, he bade her take Proserpine's box to his mother, and he assured her that all thereafter would be well. While the joyful Psyche hastened on her errand, the god flew up to Olympus. He wanted to make certain that Venus would give them no more trouble, so he went straight to Jupiter himself. The father of gods and men consented at once to all that Cupid asked, even though, he said, "You have done me great harm in the past, seriously injured my good name and my dignity by making me change myself into a bull and a swan and so on. However, I cannot refuse you." Then he called a full assembly of the gods and announced to all, including Venus, that Cupid and Psyche were formally married, and that he proposed to bestow immortality upon the bride. Mercury brought Psyche into the palace of the gods, and Jupiter himself gave her the ambrosia to taste, which made her immortal. This, of course, completely changed the situation. Venus could not object to a goddess for her daughter-in-law. The alliance had become eminently suitable. No doubt she reflected also that Psyche, living up in heaven with a husband and children to care for, could not be much on the earth to turn men's heads and interfere with her own worship. So all came to a most happy end. Love in the soul, for that is what Psyche means, had sought and, after sore trials, found each other, and that union could never be broken. 4 Great Adventures. Phaëthon. This is one of Ovid's best stories, vividly told, details used not for mere decoration, but to heighten the effect. The palace of the sun was a radiant palace. It shone with gold and gleamed with ivory, and sparkled with jewels. Everything without and within flashed and glowed and glittered. It was always high noon there. Shadowy twilight never dimmed the brightness. Darkness and night were unknown. Few among mortals could have long endured that unchanging brilliancy of light, but few had ever found their way thither. Nevertheless, one day a youth, mortal on his mother's side, dared to approach. Often he had to pause and clear his dazzled eyes, but the errand which had brought him was so urgent that his purpose held fast, and he pressed on, up to the palace, through the burnished doors, and into the throne room, where, surrounded by a blinding, blazing splendor, the sun god sat. There the lad was forced to halt. He could bear no more. Nothing escapes the eyes of the sun. He saw the boy instantly, and he looked at him very kindly. "What brought you here?" he asked. "I have come," the other answered boldly, "to find out if you are my father or not. My mother said you were, but the boys at school laugh when I tell them I am your son. They will not believe me. I told my mother, and she said I had better go and ask you." Smiling, the sun took off his crown of burning light so that the lad could look at him without distress. "Come here, Phaëthon," he said. "You are my son. Clymene told you the truth. I expect you will not doubt my word too, but I will give you a proof. Ask anything you want of me, and you shall have it. I call the Styx to be witness to my promise, the river of the oath of the gods." No doubt Phaëthon had often watched the sun riding through the heavens, and had told himself with a feeling, half awe, half excitement, "It is my father up there." And then he would wonder what it would be like to be in that chariot, guiding the steeds along that dizzy course, giving light to the world. Now at his father's worlds his wild dream had become possible. Instantly he cried, "I choose to take your place, Father. That is the only thing I want. Just for a day, a single day. Let me have your car to drive." The son realized his own folly. Why had he taken that fatal oath and bound himself to give in to anything that happened to enter a boy's rash young head? "Dear lad," he said, "this is the only thing I would have refused you. I know I cannot refuse. I have sworn by the Styx. I must yield if you persist, but I do not believe you will. Listen while I tell you what this is you want. You are Clymene's son as well as mine. You are mortal, and no mortal could drive my chariot. Indeed, no god except myself can do that. The ruler of the gods cannot. Consider the road. It rises up from the sea so steeply that the horses can hardly climb it, fresh though they are in the early morning. In mid-heaven it is so high that even I do not like to look down. Worst of all is the descent, so precipitous that the sea gods waiting to receive me wonder how I can avoid falling headlong. To guide the horses, too, is a perpetual struggle. Their fiery spirits grow hotter as they climb, and they scarcely suffer my control. What would they do with you? Are you fancying that there are all sorts of wonders up there, cities of the gods full of beautiful things? Nothing of the kind. You will have to pass beasts, fierce beasts of prey, and they are all that you will see. The bull, the lion, the scorpion, the great crab, each will try to harm you. Be persuaded. Look around you. See all the goods the rich world holds. Choose from them your heart's desire, and it shall be yours. If what you want is to be proved my son, my fears for you are proof enough that I am your father." But none of all this wise talk meant anything to the boy. A glorious prospect opened before him. He saw himself proudly standing in that wondrous car, his hands triumphantly guiding the steeds which Jove himself could not master. He did not give a thought to the dangers his father detailed. He felt not a quiver of fear, not a doubt of his own powers. At last the son gave up trying to dissuade him. It was hopeless, as he saw. Besides, there was no time. The moment for starting was at hand. Already the gates of the east glowed purple, and dawn had opened her courts full of rosy light. The stars were leaving the sky. Even the lingering morning star was dim. There was need for haste, but all was ready. The seasons, the gatekeepers of Olympus, stood waiting to fling the doors wide. The horses had been bridled and yoked to the car. Proudly and joyously Phaëthon mounted it, and they were off. He had made his choice. Whatever came of it, he could not change now. Not that he wanted to in that first exhilarating rush through the air, so swift that the east wind was outstripped and left far behind. The horses' flying feet went through the low-banked clouds near the ocean as through a thin sea mist, and then up and up in the clear air, climbing the height of heaven. For a few ecstatic moments, Phaëthon felt himself the lord of the sky. But suddenly there was a change. The chariot was swinging wildly to and fro. The pace was faster. He had lost control. Not he, but the horses were directing the course. That light weight in the car, those feeble hands clutching the reins, had told them their own driver was not there. They were the masters then. No one else could command them. They left the road and rushed where they chose, up, down, to the right, to the left. They nearly wrecked the chariot against the scorpion. They brought up short and almost ran into the crab. By this time the poor charioteer was half fainting with terror, and he let the reins fall. That was the signal for more mad and reckless running. The horses soared up to the very top of the sky, and then, plunging headlong down, they set the world on fire. The highest mountains were the first to burn, Ida and Helicon, where the Muses dwell, Parnassus, and heaven-piercing Olympus. Down their slopes the flame ran to the low-lying valleys and the dark forest lands, until all things everywhere were ablaze. The springs turned into steam, the rivers shrank. It is said that it was then the Nile fled and hid his head, which is still hidden. In the car, Phaëthon, hardly keeping his place there, was wrapped in thick smoke and heat as if from a fiery furnace. He wanted nothing except to have this torment and terror ended. He would have welcomed death. Mother Earth, too, could bear no more. She uttered a great cry which reached up to the gods. Looking down from Olympus, they saw that they must act quickly if the world was to be saved. Jove seized his thunderbolt and hurled it at the rash, repentant driver. It struck him dead, shattered the chariot, and made the maddened horses rush down into the sea. Phaëthon, all on fire, fell from the car through the air to the earth. Then the mysterious river Euridice, which no mortal eyes have ever seen, received him and put out the flames and cooled the body. The Naiads, in pity for him so bold and so young to die, buried him and carved upon the tomb, "Here Phaëthon lies who drove the sun god's car. Greatly he failed, but he had greatly dared." His sisters, the Heliads, the daughters of Helios, the sun, came to his grave to mourn for him. There they were turned into poplar trees on the bank of the Euridice, where sorrowing they weep into the stream forever, and each tear as it falls shines in the water a glistening drop of amber. Pegasus and Bellerophon. 2 of the episodes in this story are taken from the earliest poets. Hesiod in the 8th or 9th century tells about the Chimera, and Antea's love and the sad end of Bellerophon are in the Iliad. The rest of the story is told first and best by Pindar in the first half of the 5th century. In Ephyre, a city later called Corinth, Glaucus was king. He was the son of Sisyphus, who in Hades must forever try to roll a stone uphill, because he once betrayed a secret of Zeus. Glaucus, too, drew down on himself the displeasure of heaven. He was a great horseman, and he fed his horses human flesh to make them fierce in battle. Such monstrous deeds always angered the gods, and they served him as he had served others. He was thrown from his chariot, and his horses tore him to pieces and devoured him. In the city, a bold and beautiful young man named Bellerophon was generally held to be his son. It was rumored, however, that Bellerophon had a mightier father, Poseidon himself, the ruler of the sea, and the youth's surpassing gifts of spirit and body made this account of his birth seem likely. Moreover, his mother, Eurynome, although immortal, had been taught by Athena until in wit and wisdom she was the peer of the gods. It was only to be expected on all scores that Bellerophon should seem less mortal than divine. Great adventures would call to such a one as he, and no peril would ever hold him back. And yet the deed for which he is best known needed no courage at all, no effort even. Indeed, it is proved that what man would swear cannot be done must not be hoped for. The great power on high can give into his hand in easy mastery. More than anything on earth, Bellerophon wanted Pegasus, a marvelous horse which had sprung from the Gorgon's blood when Perseus killed her. He was a winged steed unwearying of flight, sweeping through the air as swift as a gale of wind. Wonders attended him. The spring beloved of poets, Hippocrene on the Helicon, the Muses' mountain, had sprung up where his hoof had struck the earth. Who could catch and tame such a creature? Bellerophon suffered from hopeless longing. The wise seer of Ephyre, Corinth, Pleiades, to whom he told his desperate desire, advised him to go to Athena's temple and sleep there. The gods often spoke to men in their dreams. So Bellerophon went to the holy place, and when he was lying deep in slumber beside the altar, he seemed to see the goddess standing before him with some golden thing in her hand. She said to him, "Asleep, nay, wake. Here is what will charm the steed you covet." He sprang to his feet. No goddess was there, but a marvelous object lay in front of him, a bridle of all gold, such as had never been seen before. Hopeful at last with it in his hand, he hurried out to the fields to find Pegasus. He caught sight of him, drinking from the far-famed spring of Corinth, Pyrrhon, and he drew gently near. The horse looked at him tranquilly, neither startled nor afraid, and suffered himself to be bridled without the least trouble. Athena's charm had worked. Bellerophon was the master of the glorious creature. In his full suit of bronze armor he leapt upon his back and put him through his paces, the horse seeming to delight in the sport as much as he himself. Now he was lord of the air, flying wherever he could, envied of all. As matters turned out, Pegasus was not only a joy, but a help in time of need as well, for hard trials lay before Bellerophon. Bellerophon on Pegasus, killing the Chimera. In some way, we are not told how, except that it was purely by accident. He killed his brother, and he went to Argos where the king, Proetus, purified him. There his trials began and his great deeds as well. Antea, the wife of Proetus, fell in love with him, and when he turned from her and would have nothing to do with her, in her bitter anger she told her husband that his guest had wronged her and must die. Enraged though he was, Proetus would not kill him. Bellerophon had eaten at his table. He could not bring himself to use violence against him. However, he made a plan which seemed certain to have the same result. He asked the youth to take a letter to the king of Lycia in Asia, and Bellerophon easily agreed. Long journeys meant nothing to him on Pegasus's back. The Lycian king received him with an antique hospitality, and entertained him splendidly for 9 days before he asked to see the letter. Then he read that Proetus wanted the young man killed. He did not care to do so, for the same reason that had made Proetus unwilling, Zeus's well-known hostility to those who broke the bond between host and guest. There could be no objection, however, to sending the stranger on an adventure, him and his winged horse. So he asked him to go and slay the Chimera, feeling quite assured that he would never come back. The Chimera was held to be unconquerable. She was a most singular portent, a lion in front, a serpent behind, a goat in between. A fearful creature, great and swift of foot and strong, whose breath was flame unquenchable. But for Bellerophon riding Pegasus, there was no need to come anywhere near the flaming monster. He soared up over her and shot her with his arrows at no risk to himself. When he went back to Proetus, the latter had to think out other ways of disposing of him. He got him to go on an expedition against the Solymi, mighty warriors. And then when Bellerophon had succeeded in conquering these, on another against the Amazons, where he did equally well. Finally, Proetus was won over by his courage and good fortune too. He became friends with them, and gave him his daughter to marry. He lived happily thus for a long time. Then he made the gods angry. His eager ambition, along with his great success, led him to think thoughts too great for man, the thing of all others the gods objected to. He tried to ride Pegasus up to Olympus. He believed he could take his place there with the immortals. The horse was wiser. He would not try the flight, and he threw his rider. Thereafter Bellerophon, hated of the gods, wandered alone, devouring his own soul, and avoiding the paths of men until he died. Pegasus found shelter in the heavenly stalls of Olympus, where the steeds of Zeus were cared for. Of them, all he was foremost, as was proved by the extraordinary fact that poets report that when Zeus wished to use his thunderbolt, it was Pegasus who brought the thunder and lightning to him. Otus and Ephialtes. This story is alluded to in the Odyssey and the Aeneid, but only Apollodorus tells it in full. He wrote, probably in the 1st or 2nd century AD, a dull writer, but less dull than usual in this tale. These twin brothers were giants, but they did not look like the monsters of old. They were straight of form and noble of face. Homer says that they were tallest of all that the life-giving earth with their bread ever nourished, handsome as dew after peerless Orion alone. Virgil speaks chiefly of their mad ambition. He says they were twins, huge-bodied, who strove with their hands to destroy the high heavens, strove to push Jupiter down from his kingdom supernal. They were the sons of Iphimedia, some say, others of Canis. At all events, whoever their mother was, their father was certainly Poseidon, although they went generally by the name of the Eloidae, the sons of Elois, their mother's husband. They were still very young when they set about proving that they were the gods' superiors. They imprisoned Ares, bound him with chains of brass, and shut him up. The Olympians were reluctant to try to free him by force. They sent the cunning Hermes to his assistance, who contrived stealthily by night to get him out of his prison. Then the two arrogant youths dared still more. They threatened that they would pile Mount Pelion on Mount Ossa and scale the heights of heaven, as the giants of old had piled Ossa on Pelion. This passed the endurance of the immortals, and Zeus got ready his thunderbolt to strike them. But before he hurled it, Poseidon came begging him to spare them and promising to keep them in order. Zeus agreed, and Poseidon was as good as his word. The twins stopped warring against heaven, and Poseidon felt pleased with himself. But the fact was that the two had turned to other plans which interested them more. Otus thought it would be an excellent adventure to carry Hera off, and Ephialtes was in love with Artemis, or thought he was. In truth, the two brothers cared only for each other. Theirs was a great devotion. They drew lots to decide which should first seize his lady, and fortune favored Ephialtes. They sought Artemis everywhere, over the hills and in the woods. When at last they caught sight of her, she was on the seashore, making directly for the sea. She knew their evil purpose, and she knew, too, how she would punish them. They sprang after her, but she kept straight on over the sea. All of Poseidon's sons had the same power. They could run dry-shod on the sea as on the land, so the two followed her with no trouble. She led them to the wooded island of Naxos, and there, when they had all but caught up with her, she disappeared. They saw instead a most lovely milk-white hind springing into the forest. At the sight, they forgot the goddess and turned in pursuit of that beautiful creature. They lost her in the thick woods, and they separated in order to double the chance of finding her. At the same moment, each suddenly saw her standing with ears pricked in an open glade, but neither saw that back in the trees just beyond her was his brother. They threw their javelins, and the hind vanished. The weapons sped on across the empty glade into the wood, and there found their mark. The towering forms of the young hunters crashed to the ground, each pierced by the spear of the other, each slaying and being slain by the only creature he loved. Such was the vengeance of Artemis. Daedalus. Both Ovid and Apollodorus tell this story. Apollodorus lived probably more than 100 years after Ovid. He is a very pedestrian writer, and Ovid is far from that, but in this case I have followed Apollodorus. Ovid's account shows him at his worst, sentimental and exclamatory. Daedalus was the architect who had contrived the labyrinth for the Minotaur in Crete, and who showed Ariadne how Theseus could escape from it. When King Minos learned that the Athenians had found their way out, he was convinced that they could have done so only if Daedalus had helped them. Accordingly, he imprisoned them and his son Icarus in the labyrinth, certainly a proof that it was excellently devised, since not even the maker of it could discover the exit without a clue. But the great inventor was not at a loss. He told his son, "Escape may be checked by water and land, but the air and the sky are free." And he made 2 pairs of wings for them. They put them on, and just before they took flight, Daedalus warned Icarus to keep a middle course over the sea. If he flew too high, the sun might melt the glue and the wings drop off. However, as stories so often show, what elders say youth disregards. As the two flew lightly and without effort away from Crete, the delight of this new and wonderful power went to the boy's head. He soared exultingly up and up, paying no heed to his father's anguished commands. Then he fell. The wings had come off. He dropped into the sea, and the waters closed over him. The afflicted father flew safely to Sicily, where he was received kindly by the king. Minos was enraged at his escape and determined to find him. He made a cunning plan. He had it proclaimed everywhere that a great reward would be given to whoever could pass a thread through an intricately spiraled shell. Daedalus told the Sicilian king that he could do it. He bored a small hole in the closed end of the shell, fastened a thread to an ant, introduced the ant into the hole, and then closed it. When the ant finally came out at the other end, the thread, of course, was running clear through all the twists and turns. Only Daedalus would think of that, Minos said, and he came to Sicily to seize him. But the king refused to surrender him, and in the contest, Minos was slain. Perseus. This is a story on the level of the fairy story. Hermes and Athena act like the fairy godmother in Cinderella. The magical wallet and cap belong to the properties fairy tales abound in everywhere. It is the only myth in which magic plays a decisive part, and it seems to have been a great favorite in Greece. Many poets allude to it. The description of Danae in the wooden chest was the most famous passage of a poem by Simonides of Psyche, a great lyric poet who lived in the 16th century. The entire story is told the sea serpent. I have followed Apollodorus, but I have added the fragment from Simonides and short quotations from other poets, notably Hesiod and Pindar. King Acrisius of Argos had only one child, a daughter, Danae. She was beautiful above all the other women of the land, but this was small comfort to the king for not having a son. He journeyed to Delphi to ask the god if there was any hope that someday he would be the father of a boy. The priestess told him no, and added what was far worse, that his daughter would have a son who would kill him. The only sure way to escape that fate was for the king to have Danae instantly put to death, taking no chances but seeing to it himself. This Acrisius would not do. His fatherly affection was not strong, as events proved, but his fear of the gods was. They visited with terrible punishment those who shed the blood of kindred. Acrisius did not dare slay his daughter. Instead, he had a house built all of bronze and sunk underground, but with part of the roof open to the sky so that light and air could come through. Here he shut her up and guarded her. So Danae endured the beautiful to change the glad daylight for brass-bound walls, and in that chamber secret as the grave she lived a prisoner, yet to her came Zeus in the golden rain. As she sat there through the long days and hours with nothing to do, nothing to see except the clouds moving by overhead, a mysterious thing happened. A shower of gold fell from the sky and filled her chamber. How it was revealed to her that it was Zeus who had visited her in this shape, we are not told, but she knew that the child she bore was his son. For a time she kept his birth secret from her father, but it became increasingly difficult to do so in the narrow limits of that bronze house, and finally one day the little boy, his name was Perseus, was discovered by his grandfather. "Your child," Acrisius cried in great anger. "Who is his father?" But when Danae proudly answered, "Zeus," he would not believe her. One thing he was sure of, that the boy's life was a terrible danger to his own. He was afraid to kill him for the same reason that had kept him from killing her, fear of Zeus and the Furies who pursue such murderers. But if he could not kill them outright, he could put them in the way of tolerably certain death. He had a great chest made, and the two placed in it. Then it was taken out to sea and cast into the water. In that strange boat Danae sat with her little son. The daylight faded, and she was alone on the sea. When in the carven chest the winds and waves struck fear into her heart, she put her arms, not without tears, round Perseus tenderly. She said, "O son, what grief is mine, but you sleep softly, little child. Sunk deep in rest within your cheerless home, only a box, brass-bound. The night, this darkness visible, the scudding waves so near to your soft curls, the shrill voice of the wind, you do not heed, nestled in your red cloak, fair little face." Through the night in that tossing chest she listened to the waters that seemed always to wash over them. The dawn came, but with no comfort to her, for she could not see it. Neither could she see that around them there were islands rising high above the sea, many islands. All she knew was that presently a wave seemed to lift them and carry them swiftly on and on, then retreating, leave them on something solid and motionless. They had made land. They were safe from the sea, but they were still in the chest, with no way to get out. Fate willed it, or perhaps Zeus, who up to now had done little for his love and his child, that they should be discovered by a good man, a fisherman named Dictys. He came upon the great box and broke it open and took the pitiful cargo home to his wife, who was as kind as he. They had no children, and they cared for Danae and Perseus as if they were their own. The two lived there many years, Danae content to let her son follow the fisherman's humble trade, out of harm's way. But in the end more trouble came. Polydectes, the ruler of the little island, was the brother of Dictys. but he was a cruel and ruthless man. He seems to have taken no notice of the mother and son for a long time, but at last Danae attracted his attention. She was still radiantly beautiful, even though Perseus was now full-grown, and Polydectes fell in love with her. He wanted her, but he did not want her son, and he set himself to think out a way of getting rid of him. There were some fearsome monsters called Gorgons who lived on an island and were known far and wide because of their deadly power. Polydectes evidently talked to Perseus about them. He probably told him that he would rather have the head of one of them than anything else in the world. This seems practically certain from the plan he devised for killing Perseus. He announced that he was about to be married, and he called his friends together for a celebration, including Perseus in the invitation. Each guest, as was customary, brought a gift for the bride-to-be, except Perseus alone. He had nothing he could give. He was young and proud and keenly mortified. He stood up before them all and did exactly what the king had hoped he would do. Declared that he would give him a present better than any there. He would go off and kill Medusa and bring back her head as his gift. Nothing could have suited the king better. No one in his senses would have made such a proposal. Medusa was one of the Gorgons, and they are three, the Gorgons, each with wings and snaky hair, most horrible to mortals, whom no man shall behold and draw again the breath of life. For the reason that whoever looked at them was turned instantly to stone. It seems that Perseus had been led by his angry pride into making an empty boast. No man, unaided, could kill Medusa. But Perseus was saved from his folly. Two great gods were watching over him. He took ship as soon as he left the king's hall, not daring to see his mother first and tell her what he intended, and sailed to Greece to learn where the three monsters were found. He went to Delphi, but all the priestess would say was to bid him seek the land where men eat not Demeter's golden grain, but only acorns. So he went to Dodona, in the land of oak trees, where the talking oaks were which declared Zeus's will, and where the Selai lived who made their bread from acorns. They could tell him, however, no more than this, that he was under the protection of the gods. They did not know where the Gorgons lived. When and how Hermes and Athena came to his help is not told in any story, but he must have known despair before they did so. At last, however, as he wandered on, he met a strange and beautiful person. We know what he looked like from many a poem, a young man with the first down upon his cheek when youth is loveliest, carrying, as no other young man ever did, a wand of gold with wings at one end, wearing a winged hat too, and winged sandals. At sight of him, hope must have entered Perseus's heart, for he would know that this could be none other than Hermes, the guide and the giver of good. This radiant personage told him that before he attacked Medusa, he must first be properly equipped, and that what he needed was in the possession of the nymphs of the north. To find the nymphs' abode, they must go to the Grey Woman, who alone could tell them the way. These women dwelt in a land where all was dim and shrouded in twilight. No ray of sun looked ever on that country, nor the moon by night. In that great place the three women lived, all grey themselves, and withered as an extreme old age. They were strange creatures. Indeed, most of all because they had but one eye for the three, which it was their custom to take turns with, each removing it from her forehead when she had it for a time, and handing it to another. All this Hermes told Perseus, and then he unfolded his plan. He would himself guide Perseus to them. Once there, Perseus must keep hidden until he saw one of them take the eye out of her forehead to pass it on. At that moment, when none of the three could see, he must rush forward and seize the eye and refuse to give it back until they told him how to reach the nymphs of the north. He himself, Hermes said, would give him a sword to attack Medusa with, which could not be bent or broken by the Gorgon's scales, no matter how hard they were. This was a wonderful gift, no doubt, and yet of what use was a sword when the creature to be struck by it could turn the swordsman into stone before he was within striking distance? But another great deity was at hand to help. Pallas Athena stood beside Perseus. She took off the shield of polished bronze which covered her breast and held it out to him. "Look into this when you attack the Gorgon," she said. "You will be able to see her in it as a mirror, and so avoid her deadly power." Now indeed Perseus had good reason to hope. The journey to the Twilight Land was long, over the stream of ocean and on to the very border of the Black Country, where the Cimmerians dwell. But Hermes was his guide, and he could not go astray. They found the Grey Women at last, looking in the wavering light like grey birds, for they had the shape of swans. But their heads were human, and beneath their wings they had arms and hands. Perseus did just as Hermes had said. He held back until he saw one of them take the eye out of her forehead. Then, before she could give it to her sister, he snatched it out of her hand. It was a moment or two before the three realized they had lost it. Each thought one of the others had it, but Perseus spoke out and told them he had taken it, and that it would be theirs again only when they showed him how to find the nymphs of the north. They gave him full directions at once. They would have done anything to get their eye back. He returned it to them and went on the way they had pointed out to him. He was bound, although he did not know it, to the blessed country of the Hyperboreans, at the back of the north wind, of which it is said, "Neither by ship nor yet by land shall one find the wondrous road to the gathering place of the Hyperboreans." But Perseus had Hermes with him, so that the road lay open to him, and he reached that host of happy people who were always banqueting and holding joyful revelry. They showed him great kindness. They welcomed him to their feast, and the maidens dancing to the sound of flute and lyre paused to get him the gifts he sought. These were 3 winged sandals, a magic wallet which would always become the right size for whatever was to be carried in it, and, most important of all, a cap which made the wearer invisible. With these and Athena's shield and Hermes' sword, Perseus was ready for the Gorgon. Hermes knew where they lived, and leaving the happy land, the two flew back across the ocean and over the sea to the terrible Sisters' Island. By great good fortune, they were all asleep when Perseus found them. In the mirror of the bright shield, he could see them clearly, creatures with great wings and bodies covered with golden scales and hair a mass of twisting snakes. Athena was beside him now, as well as Hermes. They told him which one was Medusa, and that was important, for she alone of the 3 could be killed. The other 2 were immortal. Perseus, on his winged sandals, hovered above them, looking, however, only at the shield. Then he aimed to stroke down at Medusa's throat, and Athena guided his hand. With a single sweep of his sword, he cut through her neck and, his eyes still fixed on the shield with never a glance at her, he swooped low enough to seize the head. He dropped it into the wallet which closed around it. He had nothing to fear from it now. But the 2 other Gorgons had awakened and, horrified at the sight of their sister slain, tried to pursue the slayer. Perseus was safe. He had on the cap of darkness, and they could not find him. So over the sea rich-haired Danae's son Perseus on his winged sandals sped, flying swift as thought. In a wallet of silver, a wonder to behold, he bore the head of the monster, while Hermes, the son of Maia, the messenger of Zeus, kept ever at his side. On his way back he came to Ethiopia and alighted there. By this time Hermes had left him. Perseus found, as Hercules was later to find, that a lovely maiden had been given up to be devoured by a horrible sea serpent. Her name was Andromeda, and she was the daughter of a silly, vain woman. Medusa's head. She had boasted that she was more beautiful than the daughter of Nereus, the sea god, an absolute certain way in those days to draw down on one a wretched fate was to claim superiority in anything over any deity. Nevertheless, people were perpetually doing so. In this case, the punishment for the arrogance the gods detested fell not on Queen Cassiopeia, Andromeda's mother, but on her daughter. The Ethiopians were being devoured in numbers by the serpent, and, learning from the oracle that they could be freed from the pest only if Andromeda were offered up to it, they forced Cepheus, her father, to consent. When Perseus arrived, the maiden was on a rocky ledge by the sea, chained there to wait for the coming of the monster. Perseus saw her, and on the instant loved her. He waited beside her until the great snake came for its prey. Then he cut its head off, just as he had the Gorgons. The headless body dropped back into the water. Perseus took Andromeda to her parents and asked for her hand, which they gladly gave him. With her he sailed back to the island and his mother, but in the house where he lived, so long he found no one. The fisherman Dictys' wife was long since dead, and the two others, Danae and the man who had been like a father to Perseus, had had to fly and hide themselves from Polydectes. He was furious at Danae's refusal to marry him. They had taken refuge in a temple, Perseus was told. He learned also that the king was holding a banquet in the palace, and all the men who favored him were gathered there. Perseus instantly saw his opportunity. He went straight to the palace and entered the hall. As he stood in the entrance, Athena's shining buckler on his breast, the silver wallet at his side, he drew the eyes of every man there. Then before any could look away, he held up the Gorgon's head, and at the sight, one and all, the cruel king and his servile courtiers were turned into stone. There they sat, a row of statues, each, as it were, frozen stiff in the attitude he had struck when he first saw Perseus. When the islanders knew themselves freed from the tyrant, it was easy for Perseus to find Danae and Dictys. He made Dictys king of the island, and he and his mother decided that they would go back with Andromeda to Greece and try to be reconciled with Perseus to see if the many years that had passed since he had put them in the chest had not softened him, so that he would be glad to receive his daughter and grandson. When they reached Argos, however, they found that Perseus had been driven away from the city, and where he was no one could say. It happened that soon after their arrival, Perseus heard that the king of Larissa in the north was holding a great athletic contest, and he journeyed there to take part. In the discus throwing when his turn came, and he hurled the heavy missile, it swerved and fell among the spectators. Perseus was there on a visit to the king, and the discus struck him. The blow was fatal, and he died at once. So Apollo's oracle was again proved true. If Perseus felt any grief, at least he knew that his grandfather had done his best to kill him and his mother. With his death, their troubles came to an end. Perseus and Andromeda lived happily ever after. Their son, Electryon, was the grandfather of Hercules. Medusa's head was given to Athena, who bore it always upon the aegis, Zeus's shield, which she carried for him. It's incredible how much of modern life and the popular narratives today were influenced by Greek mythology. When we read Pyramus and Thisbe today, I want you to be thinking of what Shakespearean tragedy this tale might remind you of. It won't be hard, I promise. We have already read through several tales of Greek mythology, so if you would like to see those, they will be at the end of this video. You can click through to them, or I'll pop up a card right playlist of all of those videos. If you like this series of Greek mythology, don't forget to leave a like on the video and comment if you found any similarities between this story and a classic Shakespearean tale that you might know well. 8 brief tales of lovers. Pyramus and Thisbe. This story is found only in Ovid. It is quite characteristic of him at his best. Well told, several rhetorical monologues, a little essay on love, by the way. Once upon a time, the deep red berries of the mulberry tree were white as snow. The change in color came about strangely and sadly. The death of 2 young lovers was the cause. Pyramus and Thisbe, he the most beautiful youth, and she the loveliest maiden of all the East, lived in Babylon, the city of Queen Semiramis, in houses so close together that one wall was common to both. Growing up thus side by side, they learned to love each other. They longed to marry, but their parents forbade. Love, however, cannot be forbidden. The more that flame is covered up, the hotter it burns. Also, love can't always find a way. It was impossible that these 2 whose hearts were on fire should be kept apart. In the wall both houses shared, there was a little chink. No one before had noticed it, but there is nothing a lover does not notice. Our 2 young people discovered it, and through it they were able to whisper sweetly back and forth. Thisbe on one side, Pyramus on the other. The hateful wall that separated them had become their means of reaching each other. But for you we could touch, kiss, they would say, but at least you let us speak together. You give a passage for loving words to reach loving ears. We are not ungrateful. So they would talk, and as night came on, and they must part, each would press on the wall kisses that could not go through to the lips on the other side. Every morning when the dawn had put out the stars, and the sun's rays had dried the hoarfrost on the grass, they would steal to the crack and, standing there, now utter words of burning love, and now lament their hard fate, but always in softest whispers. Finally a day came when they could endure no longer. They decided that that very night they would try to slip away and steal out through the city into the open country, where at least they could be together in freedom. They agreed to meet at a well-known place, the tomb of Ninus, under a tree there, a tall mulberry full of snow-white berries, near which a cool spring bubbled up. The plan pleased them, and it seemed to them the day would never end. At last the sun sank into the sea and night arose. In the darkness, Thisbe crept out and made her way in all secrecy to the tomb. Pyramus had not come. Still she waited for him, her love making her bold. But of a sudden she saw by the light of the moon a lioness. The fierce beast had made a kill. Her jaws were bloody, and she was coming to slake her thirst in the spring. She was still far away for Thisbe to escape, but as she fled she dropped her cloak. The lioness came upon it on her way back to her lair, and she mouthed it and tore it before disappearing into the woods. That is what Pyramus saw when he appeared a few minutes later. Before him lay the blood-stained shreds of the cloak, and clear in the dust were the tracks of the lioness. The conclusion was inevitable. He never doubted that he knew all. Thisbe was dead. He had let his love, a tender maiden, come alone to a place full of danger, and not been there first to protect her. "It is I who killed you," he said. He lifted up from the trampled dust what was left of the cloak, and kissing it again and again, carried it to the mulberry tree. "Now," he said, "you shall drink my blood too." He drew his sword and plunged it into his side. The blood spurted up over the berries and dyed them a dark red. Thisbe, although terrified of the lioness, was still more afraid to fail her lover. She ventured to go back to the tree of the tryst, the mulberry with the shining white fruit. She could not find it. A tree was there, but not one gleam of white was on its branches. As she stared at it, something moved on the ground beneath. She started back, shuddering, but in a moment, peering through the shadows, she saw what was there. It was Pyramus, bathed in blood and dying. She flew to him and threw her arms around him. She kissed his cold lips and begged him to look at her, to speak to her. "It is I, your Thisbe, your dearest," she cried to him. At the sound of her name, he opened his heavy eyes for one look. Then death closed them. She saw his sword fallen from his hand, and beside it her cloak stained and torn. She understood all. "Your own hand killed you," she said, "and your love for me. I too can be brave. I too can love. Only death would have had the power to separate us. It shall not have that power now." She plunged into her heart the sword that was still wet with his life's blood. The gods were pitiful at the end, and the lovers' parents too. The deep red fruit of the mulberry is the everlasting memorial of these true lovers, and one urn holds the ashes of the two whom not even death could part. So, what do we think? Definitely the wall that separates the lovers. Two lovers from different families forbidden to have a romance. Plus the, thinking she's dead, killing yourself, then she's actually alive, and then she kills herself. I would bet money that Shakespeare got a little inspiration off of this classic Greek tale of Pyramus and Thisbe for his very popular work, Romeo and Juliet. We have a lot more time in this video, so we will continue on to the next story, Orpheus and Euridice. I am a big fan of the musical adaptation of this work. Even though I'd heard the story before, I feel like it's very common telling. I hadn't read it before, and this book has been very illuminating as far as giving you the very oldest accounts of these stories, so I'm very interested in what Orpheus and Euridice will be like. The account of Orpheus with the Argonauts is told only by Apollonius of Rhodes, a 3rd century Greek poet. The rest of the story is told best by 2 Roman poets, Virgil and Ovid, in very much the same style. The Latin names of the gods are therefore used here. Apollonius influenced Virgil a good deal. Indeed, any one of the 3 might have written the entire story as it stands. The very earliest musicians were the gods. Athena was not distinguished in that line, but she invented the flute, although she never played upon it. Hermes made the lyre and gave it to Apollo, who drew from it sounds so melodious that when he played in Olympus, the gods forgot all else. He also made the shepherd pipe for himself and drew enchanting music from it. Pan made the pipe of reeds, which can sing as sweetly as the nightingale in spring. The Muses had no instrument peculiar to them, but their voices were lovely beyond compare. Next in order came a few mortals so excellent in their art that they almost equaled the divine performers. Of these, by far the greatest was Orpheus. On his mother's side he was more than mortal. He was the son of one of the Muses, and a Thracian prince. His mother gave him the gift of music, and Thrace, where he grew up, fostered it. The Thracians were the most musical of the peoples of Greece, but Orpheus had no rival there or anywhere, except the gods alone. There was no limit to his power when he played and sang. No one and nothing Everything animate and inanimate followed him. He moved the rocks on the hillside and turned the course of the rivers. Little is told about his life before his ill-fated marriage, for which he is even better known than for his music. But he went on one famous expedition and proved himself a most useful member of it. He sailed with Jason on the Argo, and when the heroes were weary or the rowing was especially difficult, he would strike his lyre and they would be aroused to fresh zeal, and their oars would smite the sea together in time to the melody. Or if a quarrel threatened, he would play so tenderly and soothingly that the fiercest spirits would grow calm and forget their anger. He saved the heroes too from the sirens, when they heard far over the sea singing so enchantingly sweet that it drove out all other thoughts except a desperate longing to hear more, and they turned the ship to the shore where the sirens sat. Orpheus snatched up his lyre and played a tune so clear and ringing that it drowned the sound of those lovely fatal voices. The ship was put back on her course, and the wind sped her away from the dangerous place. If Orpheus had not been there, the Argonauts too would have left their bones on the Sirens' Island. Where he first met, and how he wooed the maiden he loved, Euridice, we are not told, but it is clear that no maiden he wanted could have resisted the power of his song. They were married, but their joy was brief. Directly after the wedding, as the bride walked in a meadow with her bridesmaids, a viper stung her, and she died. Orpheus's grief was overwhelming. He could not endure it. He determined to go down to the world of death and tried to bring Eurydice back. He said to himself, "With my song I will charm Demeter's daughter. I will charm the Lord of the Dead, moving their hearts with my melody. I will bear her away from Hades." He dared more than any other man ever dared for his love. He took the fearsome journey to the underworld. There he struck his lyre, and at the sound all that vast multitude were charmed to stillness. The dog Cerberus relaxed his guard. The wheel of Ixion stood motionless. Sisyphus set at rest upon his stone. I'm so sorry. You guys know Sisyphus, right? He's, he actually showed up in a meme recently. Sisyphus was cursed in Tartarus, which is basically hell, where the bad people go in Greek mythology. He was cursed to roll this huge boulder up a hill forever, and every time it reaches the top, it rolls all the way to the bottom again, and then he has to push it back up. And he's cursed to do that for all eternity because it's hell. That's why, you might be able to hear the purring of my cat right next to me. He is very jealous. That's why when a task is, futile, people will call it a Sisyphusian task. The mental image of Sisyphus just, sitting down next to this huge boulder and being like, nah. I don't know why that was so funny to me. His whole thing is that he just continuously pushes this boulder, and then... Anyway, I don't think explaining it will make it funnier to you, but yeah, that really gave me a good chuckle. Anyway, dog Cerberus relaxed his guard. The wheel of Ixion stood motionless. Sisyphus sat at rest upon his stone. Daedalus forgot his thirst. For the first time, the faces of the dread goddesses, the Furies, were wet with tears. The ruler of Hades drew near to listen with his queen. Orpheus sang, "King of shadows, king of shades." Just kidding. I couldn't resist. Orpheus sang, "O gods who rule the dark and silent world, to you, all born of a woman, needs must come. All lovely things at last go down to you. You are the debtor who is always paid. A little was too strong a god. O king, you know, if that old tale men tell is true, how once the flowers saw you marry Persephone, then weave again for sweet Euridice life's pattern that was taken from the loom too quickly. See, I ask a little thing, only that you will lend, not give her to me. She shall be yours when her year's span is full. No one under the spell of his voice could refuse him anything. He drew iron tears down Pluto's cheek, and made hell grant what love did seek. That's a nice couplet. They summoned Eurydice, and gave her to him, but upon one condition, that he would not look back at her as she followed him until they had reached the upper world. So the two passed through the great doors of Hades to the path which would take them out of the darkness, climbing up and up. He knew that she must be just behind him, but he longed unutterably to give one glance to make sure. But now they were almost there. The blackness was turning gray. Now he had stepped out joyfully into the daylight. Then he turned to her. It was too soon. She was still in the cavern. He saw her in the dim light, and he held out his arms to clasp her, but on the instant she was gone. She had slipped back into the darkness. All he heard was one faint word, farewell. Desperately he tried to rush after her and follow her down, but he was not allowed. The gods would not consent to his entering the world of the dead a second time, while he was still alive. He was forced to return to the earth alone in utter desolation. Then he forsook the company of men. He wandered through the wild solitudes of Thrace, comfortless except for his lyre, playing, always playing. And the rocks and the rivers and the trees heard him gladly, his only companions. But at last a band of Maenads came upon him. They were frenzied as those who killed Pentheus so horribly. They slew the gentle musician, tearing him limb from limb. For anyone who doesn't know, Maenads were the Minic followers of Dionysus. They were a band of women who roamed wild through the woods and the wildlands, and they would drink and do crazy things and eat raw flesh and such like. It's one of the darker sides of the god Dionysus. They slew the gentle musician, tearing him limb from limb, and flung the severed head into the swift river Hebrus. It was borne along past the river's mouth onto the Lesbian shore, nor had it suffered any change from the sea when the Muses found it, and buried it in the sanctuary of the island. His limbs they gathered and placed in a tomb at the foot of Mount Olympus, and there to this day the nightingales sing more sweetly than anywhere else. Theseus. This dearest of heroes to the Athenians engaged the attention of many writers. Ovid, who lived in the Augustan age, tells his life in detail, and so does Apollodorus in the 1st or 2nd century AD. Plutarch, too, toward the end of the 1st century AD. He is a prominent character in 3 of Euripides' plays, and in one of Sophocles. There are many allusions to him in prose writers as well as poets. I have followed Apollodorus on the whole, but I've added from Euripides the stories of the appeal of Adrastus, the madness of Hercules, and the fate of Hippolytus. From Sophocles, his kindness to Oedipus. From Plutarch, the story of his death, to which Apollodorus gives only a sentence. The great Athenian hero was Theseus. He had so many adventures and took part in so many great enterprises that there grew up a saying in Athens, nothing without Theseus. He was the son of the Athenian king Agis. He spent his youth, however, in his mother's home, a city in southern Greece. Agis went back to Athens before the child was born, but first he placed in a hollow a sword and a pair of shoes and covered them with a great stone. He did this with the knowledge of his wife, and told her that whenever the boy, if it was a boy, grew strong enough to roll away the stone and get the things beneath it, she could send him to Athens to claim him as his father. The child was a boy, and he grew up strong far beyond others, so that when his mother finally took him to the stone, he lifted it with no trouble at all. She told him then that the time had come for him to seek his father, and a ship was placed at his disposal by his grandfather. But Theseus refused to go by water because the voyage was safe and easy. His idea was to become a great hero as quickly as possible, and easy safety was certainly not the way to do that. Hercules, who was the most magnificent of all the heroes of Greece, was always in his mind, and the determination to be just as magnificent himself. This was quite natural, since the two were cousins. He steadfastly refused, therefore, the ship his mother and grandfather urged him on, telling him that to sail on it would be a contemptible flight from danger, and he set forth to go to Athens by land. The journey was long and very hazardous because of the bandits that beset the road. He killed them all, however. He left not one alive to trouble future travelers. His idea of dealing justice was simple but effective. What each had done to others, Theseus did to him. Sciron, for instance, who had made those he captured kneel to wash his feet and then kicked them down into the sea, Theseus hurled over a precipice. Sinis, who killed people by fastening them to 2 pine trees bent down to the ground and letting the trees go, died in that way himself. Procrustes was placed upon the iron bed which he used for his victims, tying them to it and then making them the right length for it by stretching those who were too short and cutting off as much as it was necessary from those who were too long. The story does not say which of the 2 methods was used in his case, but there was not much to choose between them, and in one way or the other, Procrustes' career ended. That's pretty funny. One way or another, it can be imagined how Greece rang with the praises of the young man who had cleared the land of these banes to travelers. When he reached Athens, he was acknowledged hero, and he was invited to a banquet by the king, who of course was unaware that Theseus was his son. In fact, he was afraid of the young man's great popularity, thinking that he might win the people over to make him king, and he invited him with the idea of poisoning him. The plan was not his, but Medea's, the heroine of the Quest of the Golden Fleece, who through her sorcery knew who Theseus was. She had fled to Athens when she left Corinth in her winged car, and she had acquired great influence over Agis, which she did not want disturbed by the appearance of a son. But as she handed him the poisoned cup, Theseus, wishing to make himself known at once to his father, drew his sword. The king instantly recognized it and dashed the cup to the ground. Medea escaped, as she always did, and got safely away to Asia. Agis then proclaimed to the country that Theseus was his son and heir. The new heir apparent soon had an opportunity to endear himself to the Athenians. Years before his arrival in Athens, a terrible misfortune had happened to the city. Minos, the powerful ruler of Crete, had lost his only son, Androgeus, while the young man was visiting the Athenian king. King Agis had done what no host should do. He had sent his guest on an expedition full of peril to kill a dangerous bull. Instead, the bull had killed the youth. Minos invaded the country, captured Athens, and declared that he would raze it to the ground unless every 9 years the people sent him a tribute of 7 maidens and 7 youths. A horrible fate awaited these young creatures. When they reached Crete, they were given to the Minotaur to devour. The Minotaur was a monster, half bull, half human, the offspring of Minos' wife Pasiphae, and a wonderfully beautiful bull. Poseidon had given this bull to Minos in order that he should sacrifice it to him, but Minos could not bear to slay it and had kept it for himself. To punish him, Poseidon had made Pasiphae fall madly in love with it. When the Minotaur was born, Minos did not kill him. He had Daedalus, a great architect and inventor, construct a palace of confinement for him, which escape was impossible. Daedalus built the labyrinth, famous throughout the world. Once inside, one would go endlessly along its twisting paths without ever finding the exit. To this place the young Athenians were each time taken and left to the Minotaur. There was no possible way to escape. In whatever direction they ran, they might be running straight to the monster. If they stood still, he might at any moment emerge from the maze. Such was the doom which awaited 14 youths and maidens a few days after Theseus reached Athens. The time had come for the next installment of the tribute. At once Theseus came forward and offered to be one of the victims. All loved him for his goodness and admired him for his nobility, but they had no idea that he intended to try to kill the Minotaur. He told his father, however, and promised him that if he succeeded, he would have the black sail which the ship with its cargo of misery always carried, changed to a white one, so that Aegis could know long before it came to land that his son was safe. When the young victims arrived in Crete, they were paraded before the inhabitants on their way to the labyrinth. Minos' daughter, Ariadne, was among the spectators, and she fell in love with Theseus at first sight as he marched past her. Isn't that how the story always goes? That's not the picture I usually have in mind of a Minotaur. Looks more like a centaur to me. I think they got the halves confused here. She sent for Daedalus and told him he must show her a way to get out of the labyrinth. And she sent for Theseus and told him she would bring about his escape if he would promise to take her back to Athens and marry her. As may be imagined, he made no difficulty about that, and she gave him the clue she had got from Daedalus, a ball of thread which he was to fasten at one end to the inside of the door and unwind as he went on. This he did, and, certain that he could retrace his steps whenever he chose, he walked boldly into the maze, looking for the Minotaur. He came upon him asleep, and fell upon him, pinning him to the ground, and with his fists, he had no other weapon, he battered the monster to death. As an oak tree falls on the hillside, crushing all that lies beneath, so Theseus, he presses out the life, the brute's savage life, and now it lies dead. Only the head sways slowly, but the horns are useless now. When Theseus lifted himself up from that terrific struggle, the ball of thread lay where he had dropped it. With it in his hands, the way out was clear. The others followed, and taking Ariadne with them, they fled to the ship and over the sea toward Athens. On the way there, they put in at the island of Naxos, and what happened then is differently reported. One story says that Theseus deserted Ariadne. She was asleep, and he sailed away without her, but Dionysus found her and comforted her. The other story is much more favorable to Theseus. She was extremely seasick, and he set her ashore to recover while he returned to the ship to do some necessary work. A violent wind carried him out to sea and kept him there a long time. On his return, he found that Ariadne had died, and he was deeply afflicted. Likely story, buddy. Both stories agree that when they drew near to Athens, he forgot to hoist the white sail. Either his joy at the success of his voyage put every other thought out of his head, or his grief for Ariadne. The black sail was seen by his father, King Aegeus, from the Acropolis, where for days he had watched the sea with straining eyes. It was to him a sign of his son's death, and he threw himself down from a rocky height into the sea and was killed. The sea into which he fell was called the Aegean Sea ever after. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. That's pretty cool. The Minotaur in the Labyrinth. So Theseus became king of Athens, a most wise and disinterested king. He declared to the people that he did not wish to rule over them. He wanted a people's government where all would be equal. He resigned his royal power and organized a commonwealth, building a council hall where the citizens should gather and vote. The only office he kept for himself was that of commander-in-chief. Thus Athens became, of all Earth's cities, the happiest and most prosperous, the only true home of liberty, the one place in the world where the people governed themselves. Sounds like this was written by an Athenian. It was for this reason that in the great war of the Seven against Thebes, when the victorious Thebans refused burial to those of the enemy who had died, the vanquished turned to Theseus and Athens for help, believing that free men under such a leader would never consent to having the helpless dead wronged. They did not turn in vain. Theseus led his army against Thebes, conquered her, and forced her to allow them to be buried. But when he was victor, he did not return evil to the Thebans for the evil they had done. He showed himself the perfect knight. He refused to let his army enter and loot the city. He had come not to harm Thebes, but to bury the argive dead, and the duty done, he led his soldiers back to Athens. In many other stories he shows the same qualities. He received the aged Oedipus, whom everyone else had cast out. He was with him when he died, sustaining and comforting him. He protected his two helpless daughters and sent them safely home after their father's death. When Hercules, in his madness, killed his wife and children, and upon his return to sanity determined to kill himself, Theseus alone stood by him. Hercules' other friends fled, fearing to be polluted by the presence of one who had done so horrible a deed. But Theseus gave him his hand, roused his courage, told him to die would be a coward's act, and took him to Athens. All the cares of state, however, and all the deeds of knight-errantry to defend the wronged and helpless, could not restrain Theseus's love of danger for the sake of danger. He went to the country of the Amazons, the women warriors, some say with Hercules, some say alone, and brought away one of them, whose name is given sometimes as Antiope, sometimes as Hippolyta. It is certain that the son she bore Theseus was named Hippolytus, and that after his birth the Amazons came to rescue her and invaded Attica, the country around Athens, even making their way into the city. They were finally defeated, and no other enemy entered Attica as long as Theseus lived. But he had many other adventures. He was one of the men who sailed on the Argo to find the Golden Fleece. He took part in the great Caledonian hunt, when the king of Caledon called upon the noblest in Greece to help him kill the terrible boar which was laying waste to his country. During the hunt, Theseus saved the life of his rash friend, Perseus, as he did indeed a number of times. Perseus was quite as adventurous as Theseus, but by no means as successful, so that he was perpetually in trouble. Theseus was devoted to him and always helped him out. The friendship between them came about through an especially rash act on Perseus' part. It occurred to him that he would like to see for himself if Theseus was as great a hero as he was said to be, and he forthwith went into Attica and stole some of Theseus's cattle. Great idea, buddy. When he heard that Theseus was pursuing him, instead of hurrying away, he turned around and went to meet him, with the intention, of course, of deciding then and there which was the better man. But as the two faced each other, Perseus, impulsive as always, suddenly forgot everything in his admiration of the other. He held out his hand to him and cried, "I will submit to any penalty you impose, you be the judge." Theseus, delighted at this warm-hearted action, answered, "All I want is for you to be my friend and brother in arms." And they took a solemn oath of friendship. Talk about a meet-cute. When Perseus, who was king of the Lapithae, they let this guy be king. That's crazy. Married Theseus was, of course, one of the guests, and was exceedingly useful there. The marriage feast was perhaps the most unfortunate that ever took place. Oh no. The centaurs, creatures who each had the body of a horse and the chest and face of a man, were related to the bride and came to the wedding. They proceeded to get drunk and to seize the woman. Theseus leapt to the defense of the bride and struck down the centaur who was trying to carry her off. A terrible battle followed, but the Lapithae conquered and finally drove the whole race of centaurs out of the country, Theseus helping them to the end. But in the last adventure the two undertook, he could not save his friend. Quite characteristically, Perseus, after the bride of the disastrous wedding feast was dead, decided that for his second wife he would try to get the most carefully guarded lady in all the universe, none other than Persephone herself. Theseus agreed, of course, to help him out, but, stimulated probably by the idea of this magnificently dangerous undertaking, declared that he would himself carry off Helen. The future heroine of Troy. Then a child, and when she was grown, marry her. Jesus. This, though less hazardous than the abduction of Persephone, was perilous enough to satisfy the most ambitious. Helen's brothers were Castor and Pollux, more than a match for any mortal hero. Theseus succeeded in kidnapping the little girl, and just how we are not told. But the two brothers marched against the town she had been taken to and got her back. Luckily for him, they did not find Theseus there. He was on his way to the underworld with Perseus. The details of their journey and arrival there are not known beyond the fact that the Lord of Hades was perfectly aware of their intention and amused himself by frustrating it in a novel way. He did not kill them, of course, they were already in the realm of death, but he invited them as a friendly gesture to sit in his presence. They did so on the seat he pointed them to, and there they stayed. It was called the Chair of Forgetfulness. Whoever sat on it forgot everything. His mind became a blank, and he did not move. There Pyramus sits forever, but Theseus was freed by his cousin. When Hercules came to the underworld, he lifted Theseus from the seat and brought him back to earth. He tried to do the same for Pyramus, but could not. The king of the dead knew that it was he who had planned to carry off Persephone, and he held him fast. In the years later of his life, Theseus married Ariadne's sister Phaëthon, and thereby drew down terrible misfortunes on her, and on himself, and on his son Hippolytus, the son the Amazon had borne him. He sent his son Hippolytus away, while still a young child, to be brought up in the southern city where Theseus had spent his own youth. The boy grew to splendid manhood, a great athlete and hunter, despising those who lived in luxurious ease, and still more those who were soft enough and silly enough to fall in love. He scorned Aphrodite. He worshipped only Artemis, the huntress chaste and fair. So matters stood when Theseus came to his old home, bringing Phaëthon with him. A strong affection grew up at once between father and son. They delighted in each other's company. As for Phaëthon, her stepson Hippolytus took no notice of her. He never noticed women. But it was far otherwise with her. She fell in love with him, madly and miserably, overwhelmed with shame at such a love, but utterly unable to conquer it. Aphrodite was back of this wretched and ominous state of affairs. She was angry at Hippolytus, and determined to punish him to the utmost. Phaëthon, in her anguish, desperate, seeing no way for her anywhere, resolved to die and let no one know why. Theseus at the time was away from home, but her old nurse, completely devoted to her and unable to think anything bad that Phaëthon wanted, discovered all, her secret passion, her despair, and her determination to kill herself. With only one thought in her mind, to save her mistress, she went straight to Hippolytus. "She is dying for love of you," she said. "Give her life, give her love for love." Hippolytus drew away from her with loathing. The love of any woman would have disgusted him, but this guilty love sickened and horrified him. He rushed out into the courtyard, she following him and beseeching him. Phaëthon was sitting there, but he never saw her. He turned in furious indignation to the old woman. "You pitiable wretch," he said, "trying to make me betray my father. I feel polluted by merely hearing such words. Oh, women, vile women, every one of them is vile. I will never enter this house again except when my father is in it." He flung away, and the nurse, turning, faced Phaëthon. She had risen, and there was a look on her face which frightened the old woman. "I'll help you still," she stammered. "Hush," Phaëthon said. "I will settle my own affairs." With that she entered the house, and the nurse, trembling, crept after her. A few minutes later the voices of men were heard greeting the master of the house on his return, and Theseus entered the courtyard. Weeping women met him there. They told him that Phaëthon was dead. She had killed herself. They had just found her, quite dead, but in her hand a letter to her husband. "Oh, dearest and best," Theseus said, "are your last desires written here? This is your seal, yours who will never more smile upon me." He opened and read it again. Then he turned to the servants filling the courtyard. "This letter cries aloud," he said. "The words speak, they have a tongue. Know all of you that my son laid violent hands upon my wife. O Poseidon God, hear me while I curse him and fulfill my curse." The silence that followed was broken by hurrying footsteps. Hippolytus entered. "What happened?" he cried. "How did she die? Father, tell me yourself. Do not hide your grief from me." "There ought to be a true yardstick to measure affection by," said Theseus. "Some means to know who is to be trusted and who is not. You here, look, my son, proved base by the hand of her who is dead. He offered her violence. Her letter outweighs any words you could speak. Go, you are in exile from this land. Go to your ruin at once." "Father," Hippolytus answered, "I have no skill in speaking, and there is no witness to my innocence. The only one is dead. All I can do is to swear by Zeus above that I never touched your wife, never desired to, never gave her a thought. May I die in wretchedness if I am guilty." "Dead she proves her truth," Theseus said. "Go, you are banished from the land." Hippolytus went, but not into exile. Death was waiting close at hand for him too. As he drove along the sea road away from the home he was leaving forever, his father's curse was fulfilled. A monster came up from the water, and his horses, terrified beyond even his firm control, ran away. The chariot was shattered, and he was mortally hurt. Theseus was not spared. Artemis appeared to him and told him the truth. "I do not come to bring you help, but only pain, to show you that your son was honorable. Your wife was guilty, mad in love for him, and yet she fought her passion, and she died. But what she wrote was false." As Theseus listened, overwhelmed by his sum of terrible events, Hippolytus, still breathing, was carried in. He gasped out, "I was innocent. Artemis, my goddess, your huntsman is dying. And no other can take your place, dearest of men to me," she told him. Hippolytus turned his eyes from her radiance to Theseus, broken-hearted. "Father, dear father," he said, "it was not your fault. If only I could die for you," Theseus cried. The calm, sweet voice of the goddess broke in on their anguish. "Take your son in your arms, Theseus," she said. "It was not you that killed him. It was Aphrodite. Know this, that he will never be forgotten. In song and story, men will remember him." She vanished from sight, but Hippolytus, too, was gone. He had started on the road that leads down to the realm of death. Theseus's death also was wretched. He was at the court of a friend, King Lycomedes, where a few years later Achilles was to hide disguised as a girl. Some say that Theseus had gone there because Athens had banished him. At all events, the king, his friend, and his host killed him, and we are not told why. Even if the Athenians did banish him, very soon after his death they honored him as no other mortal. They built a great tomb for him and decreed that it should be forever a sanctuary for slaves and for all poor and helpless people, in memory of one who through his life had been the protector of the defenseless. The Quest of the Golden Fleece. This is the title of a long poem very popular in classical days by the 3rd century poet Apollonius of Rhodes. He tells the whole story of the quest except for the part about Jason and Peleus, which I have taken from Pindar. It is the subject of one of his most famous odes, written in the first half of the 5th century. Apollonius ends his poem with the return of the heroes to Greece. I have added the account of what Jason and Medea did there, taking it from the 5th century tragic poet Euridice, who made it the subject of one of his best plays. These three writers are very unlike each other. No prose paraphrase can give any idea of Pindar, except perhaps something of a singular power for vivid and minutely detailed description. Readers of the Aeneid will be reminded of Virgil by Apollonius. The difference between Euripides' Medea and Apollonius' heroine, and also Virgil's Dido, is in its degree measure of what Greek tragedy was. I've got some tea here for me, so make sure you sit back and settle in with the warm beverage and cozy yourself up for this story. The first hero in Europe who undertook a great journey was the leader of the quest of the Golden Fleece. He was supposed to have lived a generation earlier than most famous Greek traveler, the hero of the Odyssey. It was of course a journey by water. Rivers, lakes, and seas were the only highways. There were no roads. All the same, a voyager had to face perils not only on the deep, but on the land as well. Ships did not sail by night, and any place where sailors put in might harbor a monster or a magician who could work more deadly harm than storm and shipwreck. High courage was necessary to travel, especially outside of Greece. No story proved this fact better than the account of what the heroes suffered who sailed in the ship Argo to find the Golden Fleece. It may be doubted, indeed, if there ever was a voyage on which sailors had to face so many and such varied dangers. However, they were all heroes of renown, some of them the greatest in Greece, and they were quite equal to their adventures. The tale of the Golden Fleece begins with a Greek king named Athamas, who got tired of his wife, put her away, and married another, the Princess Ino. Nephele, the first wife, was afraid for her 2 children, especially the boy Phrixus. She thought the second wife would try to kill him so that her own son could inherit the kingdom, and she was right. This second wife came from a great family. Her father was Cadmus, the excellent king of Thebes. Her mother and her 3 sisters were women of blameless lives. But she herself, Ino, determined to bring about the little boy's death, and she made an elaborate plan how this was to be done. Somehow she got possession of all the seed corn and parched it before the men went out for the sowing, so that, of course, there was no harvest at all. When the king sent a man to ask the oracle what he should do in this fearful distress, she persuaded, or more probably, bribed the messenger to say that the oracle had declared the corn would not grow again unless they offered up the young prince as a sacrifice. The people, threatened with starvation, forced the king to yield and permit the boy's death. To the later Greeks, the idea of such a sacrifice was as horrible as it is to us, and when it played a part in a story, they almost always changed it into something less shocking. As this tale has come down to us, when the boy had been taken to the altar, a wondrous ram with a fleece of pure gold snatched him and his sister up and bore them away through the air. Hermes had sent him in answer to their mother's prayer. While they were crossing the strait that separates Europe and Asia, the girl, whose name was Hel, slipped and fell into the water. She was drowned, and the strait was named for her, the Sea of Hell, the Hellespont. The boy came safely to land, to the country of Colchis, on the unfriendly sea, the Black Sea, which had not yet become friendly. The Colchians were a fierce people. Nevertheless, they were kind to Phrixus, and their king Aedes let him marry one of his daughters. It seemed odd that Phrixus sacrificed to Zeus the ram that had saved him in gratitude for having been saved, but he did so, and he gave the precious golden fleece to King Aedes.
Phrixus had an uncle who was by rights a king in Greece, but had had his kingdom taken away from him by his nephew, a man named Peleus. The king's young son, Jason, the rightful heir to the kingdom, had been sent secretly away to a place of safety, and when he was grown he came boldly back to claim the kingdom from his wicked cousin. The usurper Peleus had been told by an oracle that he would die at the hands of kinsmen, and that he should beware of anyone whom he saw shod with only a single sandal. In due time, such a man came to the town. One foot was bare, in all other ways he was well clad, a garment fitting close to his splendid limbs, and around his shoulders a leopard skin to turn the showers. He had not shorn the bright locks of his hair, they ran rippling down his back. He went straight into the town and entered the marketplace fearlessly, at the time when the multitude filled it. None knew him, but one and another wondered at him and said, "Can he be Apollo, or Aphrodite's lord? Not one of Poseidon's bold sons, for they are dead." So they questioned each other. But Peleus came in hot haste at the tidings, and when he saw the single sandal he was afraid. He hid his terror in his heart, however, and addressed the stranger. "What country is your fatherland? No hateful and defiling lies, I beg you, tell me the truth." With gentle words the other answered, "I have come to my home to recover the ancient honor of my house. This land no longer ruled aright, which Zeus gave to my father. I am your cousin, and they call me by the name of Jason. You and I must rule ourselves by the law of right, not appeal to brazen swords or spears. Keep all the wealth you have taken, the flocks and tawny herds of cattle in the fields, but the sovereign scepter and the throne release to me, so that no evil quarrel will arise from them." Peleus gave him a soft answer. "So shall it be, but one thing first must be done. The dead Phrixus brings us back the golden fleece, and thus bring back his spirit to his home. The oracle has spoken. But for me, already old age is my companion, while the flower of your youth is only now coming into full bloom. Do you go upon this quest, and I swear with Zeus as a witness that I will give up the kingdom and that sovereign rule to you." So he spoke, believing in his heart that no one could make the attempt and come back alive. The idea of the great adventure was delightful to Jason. He agreed, and let it be known everywhere that this would be a voyage indeed. The young men of Greece joyfully met the challenge. They came, all the best and noblest, to join the company. Hercules, the greatest of all heroes, was there, Orpheus, the master musician, Castor with his brother Pollux, Achilles' father, Peleus, and many another. Hera was helping Jason, and it was she who kindled in each one the desire not to be left behind nursing a life without peril by his mother's side, but even at the Prince of Death to drink with his comrades the peerless elixir of valor. They set sail in the ship Argo. Jason took in his hands a golden goblet and, pouring a libation of wine into the sea, called upon Zeus, whose lance is the lightning, to speed them on their way. Great perils lay before them, and some of them paid with their lives for drinking that peerless elixir. They put in first at Lemnos, a strange island where only women lived. They had risen up against the men and killed them all, except one, the old king. His daughter, Hypsipyle, a leader among the women, had spared her father and set him afloat on the sea in a hollow chest, which finally carried him to safety. These fierce creatures, however, welcomed the Argonauts and helped them with good gifts of food and wine and garments before they sailed away. Soon after they left Lemnos, the Argonauts lost Hercules from the company. A lad named Hylas, his armor-bearer, very dear to him, was drawn under the water as he dipped his pitcher in a spring by a water nymph who saw the rosy flush of his beauty and wished to kiss him. She drew her arms around his neck and drew him down into the depths, and he was seen no more. Hercules sought him madly everywhere, shouting his name, and plunging deeper and deeper into the forest away from the sea. He had forgotten the Fleece and the Argo and his comrades, everything except Hylas. He did not come back, and finally the ship had to sail without him. Their next adventure was with the Harpies, frightful flying creatures with hooked beaks and claws who always left behind them a loathsome stench, sickening to all living creatures. Where the Argonauts had beached their boat for the night lived a lonely and wretched old man, to whom Apollo the truth-teller had given the gift of prophecy. He foretold unerringly what would happen, and this had displeased Zeus, who always liked to wrap in mystery what he would do, and very sensibly too, in the opinion of all who knew Hera. So he inflicted a terrible punishment upon the old man. Whenever he was about to dine, the Harpies, who were called the Hounds of Zeus, swooped down and defiled the food, leaving it so foul that no one could bear to be near it, much less eat it. When the Argonauts saw the poor old creature, his name was Phineus. He was like a lifeless dream, creeping on withered feet, trembling for weakness, and only the skin on his body held his bones together. He welcomed them gladly and begged them to help him. He knew through his gift of prophecy that he could be defended from the Harpies by 2 men alone, who were among the company on the Argo, the sons of Boreas, the great north wind. All listened to him with pity, and the 2 gave him eagerly their promise to help. While the others set forth food for him, Boreas' sons took their stand beside him with drawn swords. He had hardly put a morsel to his lips when the hateful monsters darted down from the sky, and in a moment had devoured everything, and were flying off, leaving the intolerable odor behind them. But the wind-swift sons of the north wind followed them. They caught up with them and struck at them with their swords. They would assuredly have cut them to pieces if Iris, the rainbow messenger of the gods, gliding down from heaven, had not checked them. They must forbear to kill the hounds of Zeus, she said, but she swore by the waters of the Styx, the oath that none can break, that they would never again trouble Phineus. So the 2 returned gladly and comforted the old man, who in his joy sat feasting with the heroes all through the night. The Harpies and the Argonauts. He gave them wise advice, too, about the dangers before them, and especial about the clashing rocks, the simple gates that rolled perpetually against one another while the sea boiled up around them. The way to pass between them, he said, was first to make trial with the dove. If she passed through safely, then the chances were that they too would get through. But if the dove were crushed, they must turn back and give up all hope of the golden fleece. The next morning they started, with a dove of course, and were soon in sight of the great rolling rocks. It seemed impossible that there could be a way between them, but they freed the dove and watched her. She flew through and came out safe. Only the tips of her tail feathers were caught between the rocks as they rolled back together, and those were torn away. The heroes went after her as swiftly as they could. The rocks parted, the rowers put forth all their strength, and they too came through safely. Just in time, however, for as the rocks clashed together again, the extreme end of the stern ornament was shorn off. By so little they escaped destruction, but ever since they passed them, the rocks have been rooted fast to each other, and have never any more brought disaster to sailors. Not far from there was the country of the warrior woman. The Amazons, the daughters, strangely enough, of that most peace-loving nymph, Sweet Harmony. But their father was Ares, the terrible god of war, whose ways they followed, and not their mother's. The heroes would gladly have halted and closed in battle with them, and it would not have been a battle without bloodshed, for the Amazons were not gentle foes. But the wind was favorable, and they hurried on. They caught a glimpse of the Caucasus as they sped past, and of Prometheus on his rock high above them, and they heard the fanning of the eagle's huge wings as it darted down to its bloody feast. They stopped for nothing, and that same day at sunset, they reached Colchis, the country of the Golden Fleece. They spent the night facing they knew not what, and feeling that there was no help for them anywhere except in their own valor. Up in Olympus, however, a consultation was being held about them. Hera, troubled at the danger they were in, went to ask Aphrodite's help. The goddess of love was surprised at the visit, for Hera was no friend of hers. Still, when the great queen of Olympus begged for her aid, she was awed and promised to do all she could. Together they planned that Aphrodite's son Cupid should make the daughter of the Colchian king fall in love with Jason. That was an excellent plan, for Jason, the maiden, who was named Medea, knew how to work a very powerful magic, and could undoubtedly save the Argonauts if she would use her dark knowledge for them. So Aphrodite went to Cupid and told him she would give him a lovely plaything, a ball of shining gold and deep blue enamel, if he would do what she wanted. He was delighted, seized his bow and quiver, and swept down from Olympus through a vast expanse of air to Colchis. Meantime, the heroes had started for the city to ask the king for the Golden Fleece. They were safe from any trouble on the way, for Hera wrapped them in a thick mist, so that they reached the palace unseen. It dissolved when they approached the entrance, and the warders, quick to notice the band of splendid young strangers, led them courteously within and sent word to the king of their arrival. He came at once and bade them welcome. His servants hastened to make all ready, build fires and heat water for the baths and prepare food. Into this busy scene stole the Princess Medea, curious to see the visitors. As her eyes fell upon Jason, Cupid swiftly drew his bow and shot a shaft deep into the maiden's heart. It burned there like a flame, and her soul melted with sweet pain, and her face went now white, now red. Amazed and abashed, she stole back to her chamber. Only after the heroes had bathed and refreshed themselves with meat and drink could King Hades ask them who they were and why they had come. It was accounted great discourtesy to put any question to a guest before his wants had been satisfied. Jason answered that they were all men of noblest birth, sons or grandsons of the gods, who had sailed from Greece in the hope that he would give them the Golden Fleece in return for whatever service he would ask of them. They would conquer his enemies for him, or do anything he wished. A great anger filled King Hades' heart as he listened. He did not like foreigners, any more than the Greeks did. He wanted them to keep away from his country, and he said to himself, "If these strangers had not eaten at my table, I would kill them." In silence he pondered what he should do, and a plan came to him. He told Jason that he bore no grudge against brave men, and that if they proved themselves such, he would give the fleece to them. "And the trial of your courage," he said, "shall be only what I myself had done." This was to yoke 2 bulls he had, whose feet were of bronze and whose breath was flaming fire, and with them to plough a field. Then the teeth of a dragon must be cast into the furrows like seed corn, which would spring up at once into a crop of armed men. These must be cut down as they advanced to the attack. A fearful harvesting. "I have done all this myself," he said, "and I will give the fleece to no man less brave than I." For a time Jason sat speechless. The contest seemed impossible, beyond the strength of anyone. Finally he answered, "I will make the trial monstrous though it is, even if it is my doom to die." With that he rose up and led his comrades back to the ship for the night, but Medea's thoughts followed after him. All through the long night when he had left the palace she seemed to see him, his beauty and his grace, and to hear the words he had uttered. Her heart was tormented with fear for him. She guessed what her father was planning. Returned to the ship, The heroes held a council, and one and another urged Jason to let them take the trial upon himself, but in vain. Jason would yield to none of them. As they talked, there came to them one of the king's grandsons whose life Jason once had saved, and he told them of Medea's magic power. There was nothing she could not do, he said. Check the stars even, and the moon. If she were persuaded to help, she could make Jason able to conquer the bulls and the dragon-teeth men. It seemed the only plan that offered any hope, and they urged the prince to go back and try to win Medea over, not knowing that the god of love had already done that. She sat alone in her room, weeping and telling herself she was shamed forever because she cared so much for a stranger that she wanted to yield to a mad passion and go against her father. Far better die, she said. She took in her hand a casket which held herbs for killing. But as she sat there with it, she thought of life and the delightful things that are in the world, and the sun seemed sweeter than ever before. She put the casket away, and no longer wavering, she determined to use her power for the man she loved. She had a magic ointment which would make him who rubbed it on his body safe for the day. He could not be harmed by anything. The plant it was made of sprang up first when Prometheus's blood dripped down upon the earth. She put it in her bosom and went to find her nephew, the prince whom Jason had helped. She met him as he was looking for her to beg her to do just what she had already decided on. She agreed at once to all he said and sent him to the ship to tell Jason to meet her without delay in a certain place. As soon as he heard the message, Jason started, and as he went, Hera shed radiant grace upon him, so that all who saw him marveled at him. When he reached Medea, it seemed to her as if her heart had left her to go with him. A dark mist clouded her eyes, and she had no strength to move. The two stood face to face without a word, as lofty pine trees when the wind is still. Then again when the wind stirs they murmur, so these two also, stirred by the breath of love, were fated to tell out all their tale to each other. He spoke first and implored her to be kind to him. He could not but have hope, he said, because her loveliness must surely mean that she excelled in gentle courtesy. She did not know how to speak to him. She wanted to pour out all she felt at once. Silently she drew the box of ointment from her bosom and gave it to him. She would have given her soul to him if he had asked her. And now both were fixing their eyes on the ground, abashed, and again were throwing glances at each other, smiling with love's desire. At last Medea spoke and told him how to use the charm, and that when it was sprinkled on his weapons, it would make them as well as himself invincible for a day. If too many of the dragon-teeth men rushed to attack him, he must throw a stone into their midst, which would make them turn against each other and fight until all were killed. I must go back to the palace now, she said, but when you are once more safe at home, remember Medea, as I will remember you forever. He answered passionately, never by night and never by day will I forget you. If you come to Greece, you shall be worshipped for what you have done for us, and nothing except death will come between us. They parted, she to the palace to weep over her treachery to her father, he to the ship to send 2 of his comrades for the dragon's teeth. Meantime he made a trial of the ointment, and at the touch of it, a terrible, irresistible power entered into him, and all the heroes exulted. Yet even so, when they reached the field where the king and the Colchians were waiting, and the bulls rushed out from their lair breathing forth flames of fire, terror overcame them. But Jason withstood the fearful creatures as a great rock in the sea withstands the waves. He forced first one and then the other down on its knees, and fastened the yoke upon them, while all wondered at his mighty prowess. Over the field he drove them, pressing the plow down firmly and casting the dragon's teeth into the furrows. By the time the plowing was done, the crop was springing up, men bristling with arms who came rushing to attack him. Jason remembered Medea's words and flung a huge stone into their midst. With that, the warriors turned upon each other and fell beneath their own spears while the furrows ran with blood. So Jason's contest was ended in victory, bitter to King Aeetes. The king went back to the palace planning treachery against the heroes and vowing they should never have the golden fleece. But Hera was working for them. She made Medea, all bewildered with love and misery, determined to fly with Jason. That night she stole out of the house and sped along the dark path to the ship, where they were rejoicing in their good fortune with no thought of evil. She fell on her knees before them and begged them to take her with them. They must get the fleece at once, she told them, and then make all haste away, or they would be killed. A terrible serpent guarded the fleece, but she would lull it to sleep so that it would do no harm. She spoke in anguish, but Jason rejoiced and raised her gently and embraced her, and promised her she would be his own wedded wife once they were back in Greece. Then taking her on board, they went where she directed and reached the sacred grove where the fleece hung. The guardian serpent was very terrible, but Medea approached it fearlessly, and singing a sweet magical song, she charmed it to sleep. Swiftly Jason lifted the gold wonder from the tree it hung on, and hurrying back they reached the ship as dawn was breaking. The strongest were put at the oars, and they rowed with all their might down the river to the sea. By now what had happened was known to the king, and he sent his son in pursuit, Medea's brother, Absyrtus. He led an army so great that it seemed impossible for the little band of heroes either to conquer it or to escape. But Medea saved them again, this time by a horrible deed. She killed her brother. Some say she sent him word that she was longing to go back to her home, and that she had the fleece for him if he would meet her that night at a certain spot. He came all unsuspecting, and Jason struck him down, and his dark blood dyed his sister's silvery robe as she shrank away. With its leader dead, the army scattered in disorder, and the way to the sea lay open to the heroes. Others say that Absyrtus set sail on Argo with Medea, although why he did so is not explained, and that it was the king who pursued them. As his ship gained on them, Medea herself struck her brother down, and cutting him limb from limb, cast the pieces into the sea. The king stopped to gather them, and the Argo was saved. By then the adventures of the Argonauts were almost over. One terrible trial they had while passing between the smooth sheer rock of Scylla and the whirlpool of Charybdis, where the sea forever sprouted and roared, and the furious waves mounting up touched the very sky. But Hera had seen to it that sea nymphs should be at hand to guide them and send the ship on to safety. Next came Crete, where they would have landed but for Medea. She told them that Talus lived there, the last man left of the ancient bronze race, a creature made all of bronze, except one ankle, alone, where he was vulnerable. Even as she spoke he appeared, terrible to behold, and threatened to crush the ship with rocks if they drew nearer. They rested on their oars, and Medea kneeling prayed to the hounds of Hades to come and destroy him. The dread powers of evil heard her. As the bronze man lifted a pointed crag to hurl it at the Argo, he grazed his ankle, and the blood gushed forth until he sank and died. Then the heroes could land and refresh themselves for the voyage still before them. Upon reaching Greece, they disbanded, each hero going to his home, and Jason with Medea took the golden fleece to Peleus, but they found that terrible deeds had been done there. Peleus had forced Jason's father to kill himself, and his mother had died of grief. Jason, bent upon punishing his wickedness, turned to Medea for the help which had never failed him. She brought about the death of Peleus by a cunning trick. To his daughters she said that she knew a secret, how to make the old young again, and to prove her words she cut up before them a ram worn out with many years, and put the pieces into a pot of boiling water. Then she uttered a charm, and in a moment, out from the water sprang a lamb and ran frisking away. The maidens were convinced. Medea gave Peleus a potent sleeping draught that called upon his daughters to cut him to bits. With all their longing to make him young again, they could hardly force themselves to do so. But at last the dreadful task was done, the pieces in the water, and they looked to Medea to speak the magic words that would bring him back to them and to his youth. But she was gone. gone from the palace and from the city, and horrified they realized that they were their father's murderers. Jason was revenged indeed. There is a story too that Medea restored Jason's father to life and made him young again, and that she gave to Jason the secret of perpetual youth. All that she did of evil and of good was done for him alone, and in the end, all the reward she got was that he turned traitor to her. They came to Corinth after Peleus' death. 2 sons were born to them, and all seemed well, even to Medea in her exile, lonely as exile must always be. But her great love for Jason made the loss of her family and her country seem to her a little thing. And then Jason showed the meanness that was in him. Brilliant hero though he had seemed to be, he engaged himself to marry the daughter of the king of Corinth. It was a splendid marriage, and he thought of ambition only, never of love or of gratitude. In the first amazement at his treachery, and in the passion of her anguish, Medea let fall words which made the king of Corinth fear she would do harm to his daughter. He must have been a singularly unsuspicious man not to have thought of that before, and he sent her word that she and her sons must leave the country at once. That was a doom almost as bad as death. A woman in exile with little helpless children had no protection for herself or them. As she sat brooding over what should she do, and thinking of her wrongs and her wretchedness, wishing for death to end the life she could no longer bear, sometimes remembering with tears her father and her home, sometimes shuddering at the stain nothing could wash out of her brother's blood, of Peleus's too, conscious above all else the wild passionate devotion that had brought her to this evil and this misery. As she sat thus, Jason appeared before her. She looked at him. She did not speak. He was there beside her, yet she was far away from him, alone with her outraged love and her ruined life. His feelings had nothing in them to make him silent. He told her coldly that he had always known how uncontrolled her spirit was. If it had not been for her foolish, mischievous talk about his bride, she might have stayed on comfortably in Corinth. However, he had done his best for her. It was entirely through his efforts that she was only to be exiled, not killed. He had had a very hard time indeed to persuade the king, but he had spared no pains. He had come to her now because he was not a man to fail a friend, and he would see that she had plenty of gold and everything necessary for her journey. This was too much. The torrent of Medea's wrongs burst forth. "You come to me," she said. "To me of all the race of men, yet it is well you came, for I shall ease the burden of my heart if I can make your baseness manifest. I saved you, every man in Greece knows that. The bulls, the dragon men, the serpent, warder of the fleece, I conquered them, I made you victor. I held the light that saved you, father and home, I left them for a strange country. I overthrew your foes, contrived for Peleus the worst of deaths, now you forsake me. Where shall I go? Back to my father's house, to Peleus' daughters. I have become for you the enemy of all. Myself, I had no quarrel with them. Oh, I have had in you a loyal husband, to be admired of men, an exile now. Oh God, no one to help. I am alone." His answer was that he had been saved not by her, but by Aphrodite, who had made her fall in love with him, and that she owed him a great deal for bringing her to Greece, a civilized country. Also, that he had done her very well in letting it be known how she had helped the Argonauts, so that people praised her. If only she could have had some common sense, she would have been glad of his marriage, as such a connection would have been profitable for her and the children too. Her exile was her fault only. Whatever else she lacked, Medea had plenty of intelligence. She wasted no more words upon him except to refuse his gold. She would take nothing, no help from him. Jason flung away angrily from her. "Your stubborn pride," he told her. "It drives away all those who would be kind, but you will grieve the more for it." From that moment Medea set herself to be revenged, as well as she knew how. By death, oh by death, shall the conflict of life be decided, life's little day ended. She determined to kill Jason's bride, and then, but she would not think of what else she saw before her. "Her death first," she said. She took from a chest a most lovely robe. This she anointed with deadly drugs, and placing it in a casket, she sent her sons with it to the new bride. They must ask her, she told them, to show that she accepted the gift by wearing it at once. The princess received them graciously and agreed. But no sooner had she put it on than a fearful devouring fire enveloped her. She dropped dead. Her very flesh had melted away. When Medea knew the deed was done, she turned her mind to one still more dreadful. There was no protection for her children, no help for them anywhere. A slave's life might be theirs, nothing more. I will not let them live for strangers to ill use, she thought, to die by other hands more merciless than mine. No, I who gave them life will give them death. Oh, now no cowardice, no thought how young they are, how dear they are, how when they were first born. Not that. I will forget they are my sons one moment, one short moment, then forever sorrow. When Jason came full of fury for what she had done to his bride and determined to kill her, the two boys were dead, and Medea on the roof of the house was stepping into a chariot drawn by dragons. They carried her away through the air out of his sight as he cursed her, never himself, for what had come to pass. And that is the entire shortened version of the story of Jason and the Golden Fleece. The Argonauts, the heroic sailors who risked it all on the first oceanic Greek voyage of story, song, and fable, and of the tragic end that befell poor Medea, Jason's spurned lover. If you liked this video, there are many more Greek mythology videos where this came from.